Welcome to the online Positive Psychology Hour, a series that we do in partnership with the Whole Being Institute. My name is Caroline Colas. I'm the Senior Director of Health and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan and your host today. We are going to be discussing human connection and why it's more critical than ever with Katherine Libonate. Human connection continues to be a challenge. Many of us are still Zooming, wearing masks, keeping our distance, and gathering with only a select few. Yet our human bodies are designed for connection, and those connections in our communities are a vital source of energy, health, and overall well-being. Today, we're going to discuss why prioritizing human connection is more critical than ever. Katherine Libonate is a graduate of the Whole Being Institute Certificate Program in Positive Psychology. She will share some strategies grounded in research to create deeper, more meaningful, and high-quality connections filled with generosity, authenticity, and vulnerability. I want to tell you a little bit about Katherine. She has a diverse background in psychology, sociology, consumer insights, client management, leadership development, and business expansion. She's also a mom of 3 boys. She has over 20 years of experience advising Fortune 100 companies on building relationships, promoting synergy across business lines, and creating consensus among stakeholders and across organizational levels to drive change and achieve objectives. And I've just found this out today. She is the founder of www.happierjourneys.com, which is a travel company that curates hassle-free weekend trips and getaways for couples and groups that free up time for building lasting memories and deeper connections. Katherine, welcome to the call. I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm hoping that you'll tell us how you got to know the Whole Being Institute.
Oh, thank you, Caroline. I'm really happy to be here. I would say it was luck, maybe. So I was, it's actually a couple of years ago before the pandemic. I was traveling. I did a lot of traveling for my job, and I was in, I don't know, like a Delta Airlines room waiting for my flight or something. And I was kind of scrolling through LinkedIn and, you know, seeing what people did and what people were up to. And a coworker of mine, I was connected to somebody who was connected to the Whole Being Institute. And I just started kind of clicking away and saying, wow, that just sounds really interesting to me. And that seems to be what I'm looking for in my life. And I was just resonating with so much of kind of the positive emotions and thinking differently about problems and approach to life. And it's a couple years ago, and it just kind of never went away. And I got on the email list and I attended a couple webinars. And then finally over the pandemic, I just decided, you know, I'm gonna take the certification and I'm gonna try it. And I don't know what that means or what I'm gonna do with it or anything. I just decided to kind of take a gamble and a risk, and it was the best decision I ever made. So.
Yeah, I also completed the certificate program, and Sandy Campbell, who was my TA, is
mine as well. Hi, Sandy.
Right, and so it was an amazing journey, and you know, as we go through the pandemic, which feels somewhat endless. To anybody else, I don't know if anybody. We were talking earlier, Katherine, how we heard that Omicron. About the Omicron variant, and there was like a little dip there in my energy. And then I started to activate my hope, and I thought, wait a second, we're in a great position to handle this. And one of the reasons why is we have the Positive Psychology Hour every Tuesday and Thursday, and we can come together as a community and we can discuss resilience. And today I'm really looking forward to your topic, which is about human connection. And I think it's going to inspire me and the rest of us to, prioritize making sure that we are seeing one another and connecting to one another, and why that's really important right now, because we're in a marathon, not a sprint, as we look towards winter, as we look towards what's happening around the world with this new variant. And thank you. Just thank you so much for being here. I'm going to let you take it away. And then
okay. All right. So I'm going to do it a little different. I don't have any slides. So I get to see all of you, which I'm so excited about. And again, thank you to Phoebe for inviting me and encouraging me to participate today, and for Caroline and the JCC community for hosting me and participating in today's session. I'm really honored to be here. So we are going to utilize chat and try and make this a little interactive, if that's okay with everybody. So the first thing I'd like everybody to do is just to let us know in the chat, if you're able and willing, where are you calling from? So if everybody could just put their answers in the chat. So we've got Madison, Connecticut. Oh, Baltimore, Maryland. I'm from Baltimore. I live in California. While everybody's putting in their chat. Honolulu, Harlem, the great state of Brooklyn, New York, Washington, D.C., Rosemary Beach, Florida. Let's see if I've got New Jersey, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, West Side, I've got 2 Hawaiis, I think. All right. Okay, one more question. Actually, I have 2 more questions. The next question is, what's the weather like outside right now? So for me, it's 50 degrees and sunny, foggy, gray and cold, chilly 40s, overcast. I will send some sunshine everybody's way. Grungy, chilly, summer, chilly and gray. Snowing, 29. Fog, drizzling, and a bit gray for taking photographs. I love that. Overcast, still great to do 5 miles, either a runner or a walker. Okay. And then the last question is something you did this past weekend that brought you joy. So for me, I went to Calistoga with my family for the weekend. New OC condo with kids and dogs, seeing family, saw a play on Broadway. Oh, that sounds awesome. Cape Cod, being with friends, read a novel, cuddled under a blanket, dinner with extended family, spent time with family, celebrated twins' birthday. Oh, love Calistoga. Wrote a letter to my, I love that, 88-year-old aunt. Hanukkah dinners, gift giving, clubbing, and jazz music, time with family and puppy, Tai Chi. Oh, I love that. Zoomed an Israeli wedding of friend's grandson. Oh my goodness. Everybody had so much fun this weekend. Saw new Candace Bushnell's show, Is There Still Sex in the City? And walked in nature, one of DC's many gorgeous woods. Oh, I love that. So what's the purpose of that exercise? It's to show us that already we have some connections. So I already felt connected to the person who's from Baltimore and Washington, D.C., 2 places where I used to live. We have lots of similarities among this group, instant connections. We also have some differences. And then we have lots of opportunity to really get curious and to learn from each other. And just, hearing about what some of you did this past weekend, I'm really curious and I want to learn more about it. So already we've started to establish a bond and a bit of a connection. Over the last 20 months, we've participated in this life-changing social experiment. During this time, we've experienced varying degrees of emotion, whether that's despair, whether it's grief, exhaustion, burnout, resilience, perseverance, belonging, joy, and lots of different emotions. I believe at some level, we all became acutely aware, though, of feelings of loneliness. We all experienced some degree of loss of connection during this time. Even though I live in a house with 4 other very boisterous humans, 3 pets, I also experienced loneliness and a very deep loss of connection. We've learned through this time, and especially with his fantastic book, Vivek Murthy wrote the book Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection. He opened our eyes to the importance of connection and the impact that loneliness can have on our well-being. Loneliness is an epidemic in America, and not surprisingly, it's only been exacerbated by the pandemic. More than 3 out of 5 adults in the United States are either always or sometimes lonely. And those numbers actually come before COVID-19. We know that when we feel lonely or excluded or rejected by peers, a part of our brain that's associated with pain actually gets activated. In the book Together, Vivek Murthy shared the work of Dr. Julian Holt. She found that the impact of lacking social connection on reducing lifespan is equal to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So think about that for a minute. It's greater than the risk associated with obesity, excess alcohol consumption, and lack of exercise. Simply put, Dr. Holt found that weak social connections can be a significant danger to our health. It's associated with high blood pressure, dementia, depression, and anxiety. And lonely people are more likely to have lower quality sleep, more immune system dysfunction, and more impulsive behavior and impaired judgment. Your body, and we know that, right? We've all experienced this during the pandemic, that our bodies are designed for connection, right? Think about the first time you actually got to see somebody in person, kind of post, I'd like to call lockdown, because that's what it felt like to me for a bit of a time. I remember that, and I often go back and I savor and I think about that, and I get this kind of warm sense over my body, in hopes to kind of continue to replicate that as I connect and invite people back into my life. Obviously, with the new variant, we're all thinking a little cautiously about that, but your body's designed to extract, just as your body is designed for connection, it's designed to extract oxygen from the Earth's atmosphere, nutrients from the food we ingest, right? It's the same thing. We need food, we need oxygen, we need water, we need connection. That great feeling of nourishment when we get all of that. And it's life-giving. Connection is similar in that it's a vital source of energy, health, and overall well-being. Your supply of connection, again, just like healthy food and water, can really aid in forecasting how long we walk this earth and whether we'll thrive or just get by. We've learned from the research from author and researcher Dan Buettner, who's been traveling the globe since the 1990s, exploring where people live the healthiest and longest lives, and understanding those behaviors that might allow others to do the same. And 2 of those behaviors that are fundamentally centered around connection. The first is family. Family first, so a lot of us got to spend time with family this past weekend, which was fantastic. And during this holiday season now, we're spending time with family, which is great. So staying connected and engaged with family, it's an indicator of longevity. Individuals who have loving, nurturing relationships appear to lead healthier and happier lives. And the second is finding your people, right? So finding that community. JCC is an example, or your school community, or your work community, or your pickleball team or pickleball league. People that you're surrounded by, that bring you love and joy and positive influences, and they help in our longevity and our health. For me personally, connection and community really have been the foundation, the guidepost, and the compass that weave through all of these challenges that we've experienced over the last 18 months. I leaned in on my community of moms for support to navigate homeschool, loss of normalcy, and feelings of inadequacy. With my SIP pod, I was given the permission to be my authentic self, even when that self had tears streaming down my eyes from feelings of overwhelm or worry or sadness. That sense of belonging at work and feeling of equity, and that we were all struggling to figure out how to balance work and life in this new environment that we were in. The new connections that were blossoming in my neighborhood, now that everyone seemed to have discovered the great outdoors as a means of health and well-being. Everybody seemed to be getting outside finally. The marathon calls I had with my sister and my brother and friends, filled with laughter and reliving old memories. Each of these connections and communities literally wrapped me in a virtual blanket, gifted me with nods of recognition and encouragement and laughter, and sometimes much needed escapism. When we have a sense of belonging and connection, we feel heard, We feel emotionally understood and supported. That warm feeling of human connection, it's so important to our overall emotional and physical health. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my dad, who's someone who's very, very important to me. Unfortunately, my father did pass away a few years ago. But through the work with SIP, I didn't realize it, but I've now learned to realize that my father was a great connector. My father viewed life as a gift. He found joy in literally every moment and every encounter. When I was growing up, whenever we went anywhere, whether it was to the grocery store, the hardware store, taking a walk outside, a baseball game, he inevitably would engage in conversation with a stranger. It could be a brief acknowledgement of a shared connection. It could be, he would, ask how their day was today. He would, just randomly talk to somebody that was also wearing a University of Maryland t-shirt, because that's literally all my father ever wore, except for when he had to go to work and wear a suit. Or you could, have a much longer conversation. On our daily basis, or at least prior to COVID, on a daily basis, we would interact with strangers, right? It's just kind of part of our being, of going anywhere, doing anything. We regularly interact with strangers. Our social universe is filled with strangers, and our interactions with them can also help us, interestingly enough, stave off loneliness. It can make us and those around us feel more connected if we do engage with strangers. Even taking the time to genuinely thank your barista, your checkout clerk at the grocery store, use their name that's on their name tag, ask them how their day is going. As individuals, we want to be seen, we want to be heard, and we want to be understood. We want a sense of belonging and connection. At the root, we're all humans. And positive interactions are a two-way street. We can positively influence ourselves, but we can also have a profound impact on others. For those of us who are parents and grandparents and involved in raising young children, at times this can kind of be a difficult concept of, wait, you want me to talk to strangers? And we tell our kids all the time from an early age, don't talk to strangers. And we sort of put these ideas into their brains that, give them these potential ideas that, strangers are scary and you can't talk to them. And, I kind of want to buck that trend and help us to encourage our children that it's actually a good thing to talk to strangers. And, the person who's at the grocery store, they have a nameplate on for a reason, because they want you to use their name and they want to have a conversation with you, and you should be thanking them and ask them how their day is, or comment on something that they're wearing. Or, I've had times when I've been at Trader Joe's and I buy something, and the person who, at the grocery will ask like, oh, I've never had that before. How is it? And next thing I know, we're having a conversation about the recipe and how I serve it. And, these are things that, again, they bring us joy and they fulfill us as individuals. So not all strangers are scary, and, hopefully we can teach our kids a little differently. So again, my father, the great connector, he was deeply committed to connections, whether that was through engaging in conversation with strangers or engaging wholeheartedly with family, friends, coworkers, and neighbors. Each connection my father had with someone, he was filled with love. So when I say love, not necessarily the romantic kind that we're accustomed to, but rather what Barbara Fredrickson calls a micro moment of positivity resonance. It's that brief moment of warmth and connection that you share with another living human. It's a connection characterized by a flood of positive emotions, which you share with another person, any person whom you happen to connect with in the course of your day. You can experience these micro moments with your romantic partner, with your child, with a close friend, and even with a stranger, a colleague, or an attendant at a grocery store. As Barbara explains in her book, the vagus nerve, which connects your brain to your heart, it subtly allows you to meaningfully experience love. And the vagus nerve potential for love can be measured by examining a person's heart rate in association with their breathing rate, which is the vagal tone. So people who have a high vagal tone have more control over their emotions, their behavior, attention, and they're socially adept and can kindle more positive connections with others. And most importantly, they are more loving. So love makes us feel alive. It's perhaps the most essential emotional experience for thriving in health. And as Barbara explains, it's our super emotion, or what I like to say, our superpower, right? We all have the ability to have this superpower. And during these instances, we experience joy, gratitude, and hope. My dad, he suffered some great traumas in his life. He was born to an alcoholic and mentally abusive father. He was an only child who moved frequently. My grandfather was in the military, and found it really difficult to build lasting and deep friendships when he was young. My grandparents were also only children, so my father didn't have any aunts, any uncles, and any cousins to provide family support. At the young age of 20, my father married my mother and went on to have 3 children. So I have a brother who is 13 years older than me, and a brother who's 10 years older than me, and a sister who's 11 years older than me. 14 years after my mother and my father married, in 1975, my mother committed suicide and took her own life. So at the time, my sister was 14, my brother was 13, and I was 3. So how did my father have the resilience to really not only live during that time, but to live a prosperous and healthy life? I believe that despite these tragedies, my dad was wise enough to realize the link between positive emotions and investing in relationships and connection. To fully prosper, we need 3 types of connections. We need collective, relational, and intimate. So collective connections, those are our network, right? Our community of people with whom we share a sense of purpose. After my mother passed, my father instantly built a community around him with the sole purpose of ensuring that we had people around us who loved and supported us. So think about that. This is 1975, right? This is not a time where suicide was discussed much, right? I think, I was only 3, so I obviously didn't know a lot that was going on then, but I can only imagine that there was a lot of shame involved. It was difficult to be vulnerable. It was probably really hard to ask for help, especially from a man, and especially from someone who wasn't necessarily raised to rely on a community. But he realized that he had to build a community, and he had to reach out for support, and he was willing to do that. To me, that was just astounding, and I think really set all us up as a family for success and for recognition that we really need to rely on each other for survival. As time went on, my dad really drew from other communities for support and for, quite frankly, joy in his life. Again, as I mentioned, he's an avid University of Maryland fan. He participated in probably every Maryland team event he could. He would go to women's soccer games. He would go to everything. And he would always find people to go with who had shared connections. He worked for the school system, and education and the arts were very important to my father. He volunteered an inordinate amount of his time to raise money and to support the arts and education in the schools. He also focused on the second area, which is relational. So quality friendships and social companionship and support. So my dad made friendships a priority. There were a group of men he met with at least weekly, whether that was to have breakfast or coffee or to go to a game with. When my father did pass, which was nearly 3 years ago, I was literally blown away at the number of attendees at his funeral. He started his career as a teacher, and several former students were there, coworkers, neighbors from various houses he'd lived in throughout his life, friends, old, new. When my dad was in college, he was in a fraternity, and throughout the years, he kept in touch with his fraternity. He organized events for his fraternity brothers. He wrote letters to them. He would have phone calls. He attended their children's weddings. You name it. He was very connected to his fraternity brothers. And when he passed, all the ones that were still living and that he was connected to, traveled to my dad's funeral. And some of them traveled very far, and some of them actually traveled in ill health just to pay their respects to my dad. There's also intimate and emotional connection, someone with whom you share a deep mutual bond and affection and trust with. So my dad never did remarry, but he did eventually find a loving partner who brought him immense joy and opportunities to save her life. So again, there's kind of these three different types of connections that are really important to our prosperity and to our health. They're the collective, that network of community, the relationships, the quality friendships and social companionship, and then the intimate or emotional that in many cases we find from a partner. So the thread that connected all these people is that my dad was gifted at showing each person he connected with that they were seen, heard, and valued by him. So I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about work. And the reason is because work is a place that we spend a lot of our time, right? A third of our time is spent at work. For many of us right now, we've kind of blurred that where it feels a little bit like 100% of our time, especially those of us that are still Zooming and working at home. But the people we work with, they're really a primary source of social connection and community. The workplace is where we build relationships, we nurture networks, and sometimes these networks can last a lifetime. In many cases, they extend past work. For deeper and higher quality connections, we need to be willing to and have permission to express vulnerability. That's a really scary thing sometimes to do when we're thinking about the workplace. To quote Brené Brown, staying vulnerable is a risk we have to take if we want to experience connection. I recently had a Zoom call with a male colleague of mine. And just prior to that call, I was writing an email to my middle son's teacher. And this, Riley is his name. So Riley's experiencing some challenges in school. And through the email, the teacher and I were kind of discussing back and forth, some approaches to help him. And I was feeling a little overwhelmed of just kind of really what was going on with Riley, kind of feeling a little scared in terms of, how am I going to help him work through this? Not really sure the best way to approach some of the challenges. And as I was kind of writing this email, I was really starting to feel kind of deflated, a little overwhelmed, a little distraught. And my SIP team knows I'm a crier. Like, I totally admit it. Like, I definitely wear my emotions on my sleeve. So I definitely was getting like tears in my eyes when I was writing this email. I was just kind of feeling exasperated. And I realized, I was like, oh my God, I'm like, it's the middle of the workday, and I had a call with a colleague. And so with our work, we have this, we have Zoom, but we also have this, it's like this WebEx Teams, where somebody can like instantly call you. And it was time for our call, and he called me. And because I'm a responsible employee, I picked up the phone, I picked it up, and I'm like on camera. And, I think he could totally see, that like something was going on. And so I just said to him, I was like, can I call you back in 5 minutes? And, so he's like, sure, no problem. And so I went back to just finish my email. I just thought, I just finished this email, kind of compartmentalize it, and then I could, put my game face back on and go back to work. And so I did that. I didn't even give myself like a minute. I just like finished the email, I sent it, and then I quickly just called him back. And he could totally see, right? Like, he could totally see that something was going on. And he asked, he's like, are you okay? Is everything okay? And I had a choice, right? I could either say like, oh yeah, everything's fine, I have something in my eye, or make up some ridiculous story, or I could tell him the truth. And, I felt comfortable enough in that moment to just tell him the truth and just say, oh yeah, I just, have this challenge with my son. I'm just feeling a little overwhelmed and trying to, figure out how to work it out and blah, blah, blah. And just, I spent like a lot of time, but the fact that like, he made me feel comfortable, and I was able to be vulnerable, and he listened. He did go into a little bit of problem solving, which is typical, but that's fine. But he did actually, was very empathetic and listened. And it wasn't this big, long, drawn out thing, but it really just, it allowed me to feel so much more connected to him, so much more appreciative of him as an individual and as a colleague and as a partner. And it just, I walked away from that feeling just really blessed and really good. So Jane Dutton, who is a world expert in the field of positive organizational scholarship, so she co-founded the Center for Positive Organizations at the Ross School of Business in Michigan. She's coined the term high quality connections. So these are connections that are fleeting or enduring, and they are marked by warmth and generosity and a sense of engagement. And that's exactly what I felt, right? I felt this kind of high quality connection with my coworker and this real sense of generosity that he was open to listening to me. He gave me his time. He asked, right? He totally could have ignored me and acted like everything was just fine. But he didn't, right? And so, you know, for me, I felt like we had a deep connection. And we know we're experiencing that when we have this kind of sense of uplift, especially when someone expresses, you know, genuine concern and interest in our well-being. These high quality connections, they produce feelings of vitality. They influence not just our mood, but also our performance. They create what Dutton's colleagues and she call a positive regard, or a sense of feeling known and loved, or being respected and cared for in that connection. This effect is created by the exchange of vulnerability, responsiveness in the moment, and far from simply just, you know, being pleasant. A high quality human connections are life affirming and energizing. A few weeks ago, I think everybody can hear my dog. I forgot. A few weeks ago, I participated in a master's program orientation session via Zoom. And this particular program is kind of interesting the way it's structured before the pandemic. So they did some online learning, they did some independent learning, but then they also had a hybrid approach where the students would get together, I think it's 1 week a month in person to do some in-person leaving. So really a hybrid approach. And then obviously with the pandemic, everything needed to go online. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting that the moderator shared was that the group that did all their learning online, so the first group that went and did all their learning online, the moderator was saying that what the program had learned about this was that that group was actually more connected to each other than any of the other hybrid groups. So if you think about that, right, this is a group that really just did everything online, and previous groups had kind of online and in-person opportunities. But the group that was online felt more connected to each other than the previous groups. So why is that? I believe it's because there was an equity among that group in terms of experiences, right? They were all experiencing online learning in the middle of a pandemic for the very first time. They had instant community, right? They had a collective desire to really galvanize around a collective new experience, a new community that was built, and a drive to make it work, right? They were committed and invested in this community and the connection they built together. So we have to think about, as organizations are starting to move to kind of more of a hybrid model, right? You'll have some people at home on Zoom and others in the office. And how do we ensure that those on Zoom don't feel left out or alienated or less than because they were on Zoom? There's this really ironic story in the New York Times recently about LinkedIn. And so what LinkedIn was doing is they're thinking about what does work look like? Oh, everybody's thinking about this, right? Organizations, nonprofits, everybody's thinking about this, of what's sort of the future going to look like. And so what they decided to do is they brought in an organization who supposedly had some specialty and expertise on hybrid work environment. Because they're thinking and they're realizing, like, some of our people are going to be home and some are going to be in the office. And how do we make sure that people still feel connected to each other, right? And feel engaged in our meetings. So the supposed experts, when they were presenting, the presenter was in a conference room with other LinkedIn employees. And then there were attendees who were also on Zoom in their homes. Well, the presenter who was in the conference room while he was presenting was standing in front of the camera. So what that meant was the people on Zoom, like, couldn't see what he was presenting, couldn't even see, like, he was literally blocking the camera. So, like, talk about disengagement, right? So these are the things that we kind of have to think about is like, again, before we're all on Zoom, we were connected in a way, we had this shared experience, we had the shared environment, right? We had the dog barking in the background, we had the kids, we had the mailman, we had all these things going on. Now we're all going to be potentially in some organizations, we're going to be in a different state where there's going to be some disconnect. And it's going to be really important, I think, for companies to really think about that and think about how do we create new ways of connecting with each other where we do create a sense of equity when it may not feel like it's equitable, and understanding, empathy, and appreciation. I want to spend a few minutes talking about meetings because we do spend a lot of our time in meetings, and whether they're Zoom or in person or hybrid. How many of you have ever attended a meeting where the moderator or the leader perceives their job to be kind of the taskmaster and ensure that all objectives are achieved in the meeting, and they just kind of get down to business, right? Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending today. And instantly, the agenda pops up and we get right down to business. Even if the meeting is something you're invested in, you're engaged in, you're excited about, this still can feel a little depleting, right? It can kind of drone on if you start to feel less engaged because you're just kind of down to business. And you may feel a little less connected to the group. I know I've personally attended a lot of those meetings. Instead, we need to really approach meetings in a manner that creates energy and enthusiasm. Ultimately, the objective of every meeting, every engagement is really to tap into our creativity, right? A desire to take on projects, a sense of energy, joy, and positivity that's infectious to those around us. We really need to think about designing our meetings in new and powerful ways. Again, whether these are in person, whether they're Zoom, whether they're hybrid, to ensure that everyone is flourishing, right? There's simple strategies like conveying to our teams that we're going to build in time for banter at the beginning of the meetings. We're not going to always get down to business. Like, it's okay to have some chitter chatter, to get to know each other, to talk for a little bit, to make us all feel sort of comfortable and secure before we engage in our meetings. Or it can be more structured, right? Like asking everyone to share a book that they think everybody should read right now and why, or what are you currently binge watching, or just something to kind of create some engagement and connection among the group. Or talk about what everybody's looking forward to over the weekend or something they did this past weekend. As leaders, we have a real responsibility to express our humanity and our vulnerability. It's the greatest gift that we can give our teams. To show our teams we're willing to take risks, speak the truth. When we feel connected to our leaders, we're more optimistic, we're hopeful, and we have more energy. One of the other things that I want to talk a little bit about is, some kind of simple changes that we can make to feel much more connected to those around us. And one of those is around kind of curiosity and the way in which we ask questions, right? So we could ask the typical question, which is, how was your weekend, right? And we kind of get the typical answer, which is, oh, it was fine, or it was okay, right? It's pretty common. Versus sort of changing that question and flipping it on, what did you do this past weekend? Or tell me about something that you did that brought you joy this weekend? Or what are you looking forward to doing this coming weekend, right? Or the classic, which my children love, how was school today, right? I get the fine. Or flipping the question a little, tell me about the best part of your day today. Or if you could change any part of your day, what would it be and how? These are kind of the kinds of questions that get people to really open up. It allows us to get curious. It allows us to learn more about the people that we're engaging with. This is the one I kind of love, right? You hear this a lot, like people are like, what do you do for a living? And you kind of get the like, oh, I'm an accountant, I'm this, I'm that, right? Instead of maybe flipping it, like, how do you like to spend your time, right? You don't even know what you're going to get, right? Like, you can get some really interesting information from people when you ask questions like that. We connect through listening, right? It's the greatest gift we can give somebody who we're engaging with, is like really, truly listening to them. Linda Wallace, who teaches the fundamentals of coaching class at Whole Being Institute, has by far the best analogy for me on this, which is pretend you're watching a movie. So when you're listening to someone, literally pretend you're watching a movie. When you're watching a movie, you're not thinking about like how I'm going to solve their problem. You're not going to think about like what question I'm going to ask the actors, right? You don't get any opportunities to do those things. You literally just have to sit there and let the scene play out. And I have taken that very seriously when I listen to people, of making sure that there's eye contact, making sure that I'm fully engaged with them, making sure I'm hearing what they have to say, allowing opportunity for pause. Pause is amazing, right? Because if you're kind of allowing that opportunity for pause, next thing you know, they just keep continuing to talk and you learn that much more about that person. And you've given that person just the greatest gift ever. So that's one of my like hacks for connection. One of the other, I was listening to Priya Parker, who wrote the book, The Art of Gathering, which I haven't read the book, but I was listening to I think it was like a podcast that she did. And I thought this was just so interesting, where, and this is also a very deeply connected to connecting. She talked a lot about kind of creating environments in your next outing where your team or your community or your friends or whoever you're gathering with, you're kind of creating some new rules, right? Like we sort of get into these ruts, and I'm going to use like Mom's Night Out as an example, right? So I have a group of moms who are near and dear to me, and we periodically try and get together and go out. And what do you think we do? We talk about our kids the entire time, right? So instead of us talking about our kids the entire time, like shaking it up a little bit. Now, Priya had this idea, which some people may love, some people may not, but basically saying like, okay, on the next Mom's Night Out, whoever talks about their kids has to do a shot. That could be an interesting night. You could change it to like, you have to buy the meal, depending on what you like to do or not to do. But the whole idea, again, is like, let's change the rules up a little bit. Let's find different ways of connecting with each other, right? If we constantly kind of get into like, oh, this is the group I just talk about my kids with, or that's all we talk about, then that's all you ever talk about, right? But if you change the dynamic to, well, we're not going to talk about our kids, or in my pickleball league, when we go out to eat, we're not going to talk about pickleball. We're going to talk about tennis or something totally different. You open up the world and you get curious and you learn more about each other. And that can apply to like team lunches, right? Like if you are going to lunch, you can't talk about work. Like, let's get to know each other as people and as individuals. And again, remember, these are people we spend a third of our time with. So it's a huge source of community and connection for us. Another one is around laughter. Laughter is a huge connector, right? So Laura Kurtz, who's a social psychologist and the program manager for the Love Consortium, which I love that name, by the way, at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, she did some research and she found that couples who laughed more together and who engaged in more spontaneous shared laughter also tended to report feeling closer to, more supported by their partners. So there's evidence to suggest that shared laughter is at least a marker of high quality relationships. Further studies were done by Laura as well that showed that even sharing a laugh with anyone, those participants reported a greater desire to know the other person, right? So again, if you think about going back to the stranger, if you're sharing a laugh with somebody, there's the research participants reported kind of feeling this greater desire to really get to know that person a little bit more. So there's tremendous power in the sort of these seemingly inconsequential moments of connection that we experience. Something as simple as a shared laugh can actually signal common ground with people that we don't even know. So it's important to sort of take these results and think about, well, how do we go about our everyday lives? Recognizing that these little micro moments of connection can actually be really important for our relationships. So the next time you're in the grocery store at the checkout line, again, strike up a conversation, engage in a little bit of shared laughter. Might be exactly what that person needed or what you needed in the moment. I'm going to ask for us to use chat one more time. And if you could put into the chat a compliment that you received lately, or the best compliment you've ever received. Kids are good kids and always think of others. Oh, that's a great one. That I'm a good friend. I love that. You're so funny. You have an amazing laugh. You raise the most wonderful men. I love that. You are the best listener, that I bring fun to everything. You spoke about today made a huge difference in my leadership. I love that. Oh, you're fantastic. So that feels really good, right? It feels really good to get a compliment. It also feels really good to share the compliment with those around us and those who support us, right? It's sort of that feeling of joy and hopefulness. And again, I kind of get it back to like the superpower. You sort of almost feel like you can like do anything, right? When somebody gives you a compliment. It has a profound impact on our outlook, and it creates positive emotions when we receive compliments. It's a great connector, right? So, you know, for me personally, with my team at work, with my kids, with my friends, everybody, I have learned, especially through the work of the Whole Being Institute, the importance of really, and Phoebe is a master at this, and I don't think she's on the call anymore, but the strength spotting, right? So really focusing on the strengths and the positivity around the people around us. It has a meaningful impact on their emotions, on the interactions that you have with individuals around you, and it's a great connector. And sort of the last and final one for me personally is around gratitude, right? So gratitude is also a great connector and a way to really engage with individuals so that they feel seen, heard, valued from you, and really taking that time, right? And we've done a lot of sessions, I'm sure, on gratitude, and there's so many different ways of doing it. It could just be, you know, making sure that, you know, one of the things that I started doing is just kind of randomly texting my friends and, you know, letting them know that I'm grateful for them or what I'm grateful for, or showing appreciation for them, saying it in person, you know, using the eye contact when we can. Obviously, I know that might be getting difficult again, but, you know, even my kids, like, you know, showing them that I'm grateful for either something that they've done, or I love to tell them that I feel really lucky to be their mom. To them, they tell me that's like a compliment. So, you know, and that act of showing and expressing gratitude, that's another one. It's like a two-way street, right? Like we feel positive emotions, and the person receiving the gratitude also is experiencing those positive emotions, and we're deepening our connection to each other. So on that note, I will say again, I am deeply grateful really to each of you for sharing your time with me today, which I know is incredibly valuable. Your participation in the chat, hopefully make it a little interactive, and really for this amazing community and very supportive community. So Caroline, thank you so much. This has been a really fun experience for me.
Oh my goodness. Speaking of strength spotting, let's all put in the chat something for Katherine that you learned or you would like to appreciate. And I just wanted to acknowledge you. First, just take a moment. You know, you mentioned that your father had such great resilience, but my goodness, so do you.
Thank you, Caroline.
And I just want to
And I have to say, so my mother's name was Caroline, so I feel very connected to you for that for that reason.
Yeah. We were just talking about that. I went to get coffee with friends, and I was saying, gosh, the barista looks like my nephew. And my friend was saying, there's a homeless guy that's down the street, and he looks like someone that I love so much. And it reminds me of him so much that I'm often checking in on him. How's he doing? Because every time I see him, I also see somebody that I love, which I thought was really interesting in relationship to, really connecting to strangers, which Barbara Fredrickson, when we had her on the call, she said the importance, she actually was going to be doing a research study before COVID with the university students about the testing the impact of connecting to strangers on happiness and happy emotions. And of course that was kind of delayed, but she's really curious about exactly what you're saying and furthering her research, which is, connecting to everyday folks, and in the JCC we say, how do we make the ordinary extraordinary, the everyday extraordinary? And I think that's a little bit of what you're saying,
I love that.
Whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in our relationships with our family. And I was thinking of telling my husband how lucky I feel to be his wife, because I actually had that thought and I didn't share it with him. Joanne was saying, I love the reframing of the questions. We've got a bunch of things. I love the reframing of the questions you talked about. Deirdre was saying, thank you for your presentation in this format, trying something different. I enjoyed it. And Katherine, you are a gift to everyone who has the pleasure knowing you. Thank you for sharing your heart and knowledge with us. That's from Barbara. Thank you for sharing your authentic self with us. We can gain so many insights. That's from Lorraine. Such great laughter and openness, says Susan. Loved Katherine's insights on how much and how many people are already we are connected to, and all we need to do is be with them as a witness. Yeah, that's really interesting, that idea of watching a movie versus trying to fix the person, right? Or fix the challenge.
Yeah.
Thank you for your enthusiasm.
Oh, and I love that, because I'm a card carrying problem solver. My husband will tell you. So I have to say, when I heard that, I'm like, oh, this is going to change my relationship.
Right, which by the way is also a good thing too, right? Yeah. I mean, I think in your travel business, right, that to be able to book all of those events for people and find the solution, it's great to be a fixer, but when you're listening and wanting to connect, it's funny how those strengths can get in the way, right?
Yeah.
And when we talk, as they do in Ryan Nemec talked about, when we overuse a particular strength.
Yeah.
Lois had a real interesting question. She was saying, we can't live without food and water. Can we live without human connection? I think we've actually done some studies that there's a failure to thrive without human touch. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm not a researcher, so, it's hard for me to comment specifically on that, but I don't know. I just think about, what we've all experienced, right? In the midst of the pandemic. And I personally know people that, lived alone during the, kind of the peak of the pandemic and had no connection with anybody. And I think Zoom was like a surrogate, right? But it's not the same. And like that, literally I had people explain to me, like when they first got to like physically see somebody for the first time and even touch them, it literally almost felt like when you're on a desert and, if you have ever been on a desert and haven't had a drink of water, but like seemingly, an analogous feeling to that. So I personally think it keeps you alive.
Yeah, Mary Halpin would just share that Dasher Keltner just said in a talk, 120,000 people die a year because of lack of social connection. That's really an incredible number, says Lorraine. And I wanted to also give you a wonderful compliment that Amy said, I so wish I had been able to hear this before my 23-year-old son left this morning, especially to laugh. And let's see, when someone said this was global and refreshing and global, said Maria. I think that's a wonderful compliment. I thank you for sharing with us your vulnerability, your expertise, your humor, your heart.
Thank you. Thank you. This is so much fun.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to remove the spotlights. If I can learn how to do that on my new computer. Thank you to Nancy for reminding me to enable the transcriptions. We are, as a community, moving through this phase together. It's the third night of Hanukkah for those of you that celebrate. Happy Hanukkah. It's also the beginning of the holiday season. We just finished with Thanksgiving. Please keep coming. We're going to explore and connect to one another through the Positive Psychology Hour and stay resilient through these holidays and the cold weather. So thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Sandy, our amazing TA that we both shared. Thank you, everyone. You can put in the chat anything you want to say or unmute yourself.
Thank you, Catherine. That was amazing.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Love you guys. You're the
Thank
best.
you.
You're the
Love you
best.
guys.
Take
You
care,
are
everyone.
the best.
Be safe, be well, and we'll
You
see you
too.
on Thursday.
See you next time.
Holidays to everybody.
Happy holidays.
Happy Hanukkah.
Everything.
Thanks so
Love
much.
you.
Bye.